Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, Brice Lewis. Back at it again to talk about all things basketball once again. So, you already know what we're doing here on the podcast. Obviously, we're in the NBA offseason right now. A lot of news in terms of just trade rumors, potential free agency, potential, conversations about next season. All of that's on the slate today on the podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball on Twitter. We definitely love to interact with you on there, talk about all things basketball, questions, concerns, anything on that Twitter. Also, don't forget, leave us a review, subscribe. If you're new to this podcast, don't forget to also subscribe or review. Give us your thoughts. We love listening to hearing what our new viewers have to say and how I can be a better podcast host overall. Now we can go ahead and jump right into the basketball news for the day. So first news is actually concerning the NBA season that's coming up next year. Obviously, the NBA right now, their biggest goal right now is to figure out how they want to go about next season. Obviously, next season has its challenges. Obviously, the NBA potentially could have their season run into the Tokyo Olympics, which obviously the NBA would want to avoid, because when the Olympics are on, everybody, because it's such a international world sport, and a sport that involves every country in the world that's eligible, everybody's going to be watching the Olympics, and obviously the Olympics would happen probably during peak playoff time for the NBA, and obviously, in the business world, you don't want your ratings being destroyed by the Olympics, no one watching the playoffs, and also keeping potentially your players from being able to play in the Olympics as well. Because obviously basketball is a part of the Olympics, and so if you had that, you wouldn't be able to necessarily prepare for the Olympics if you have a season going on. So the NBA Board of Directors is set to discuss the 2020-21 schedule, including a potential start date when it meets on this Friday. Now, according to ESPN's Brian Windhorst and Zach Lowe, the board will explore the possibility of starting the 2020-21 season on Christmas Day in order to take advantage of its potentially huge viewing audience. Some team representatives don't reportedly view that as practical. However, it could lead to increased talks regarding starting the season around Martin Luther King weekend in mid-July. Now, the Christmas Day idea, the Christmas Day start, is gaining some momentum. I think a lot of people have been aiming for Christmas Day because they feel like that's when most fans that watch basketball say that is when the NBA season truly starts in their eyes. Is Christmas Day, because that's when the NFL and college start to window down. They're entering, obviously, their playoffs and, about to be playoffs in both sports. But obviously, there's not as many games on TV. There's not a whole weekend dedicated to it. So the NBA has a better chance to have games on and be the only major sporting event on those particular nights. The board also is expected to discuss implementing a schedule in which teams will play fewer than 82 games, and the number of games that they're looking at is 72 games, which would be 10 less. And that would hopefully end right before the 2020 Summer Olympics, especially if they are able to start around Christmas, specifically December 22nd. So obviously we know Adam Silver has been talking about how he would prefer to play the season as a full 82-game stretch. But obviously the issue with playing it so late is that they were going to try to finish it around the same time, so obviously that would mean more back-to-backs and less time in terms of recovery in between, which is obviously something the NBA is trying to get away from, which is why they've eliminated as many back-to-backs, and that's why they've tried to space out the schedule more, where this would go against that and basically revert back. But now they're saying, well, what if we reduce it by 10 games to help still maybe keep the schedule as close to previous last few season schedule as possible? Now, according to Shams Charania of the Athletic and Stadium, teams are stand up to make over $500 million more if they start on December 22nd as opposed to a later date. Obviously, that is huge because we all know with COVID-19, money has been affected in every major sport league, especially with no fans. Starting at December 22nd obviously puts the NBA in position, and the teams in position to make more money based off that. So obviously that would be great for the NBA. Potentially could affect the cap situation and put more money into the league in general. So obviously that is probably a big selling point for anybody who wants to start on December 22nd, is the fact that teams can make more money that way. So maybe that's something that is going to be interesting. Now, also, he noted, in also talking about that the league wants to continue using a play-in tournament to determine the Western and Eastern Conference 8th seeds in the playoffs. Obviously, I feel, especially off the bubble this year, I think that was a big success. I think it's way more interesting, competitive, and more compelling to have when you have that battle for an 8th seed, and basically, for the most part, a lot of the time, maybe the 2 teams at the end of it or the 3 teams at the end of it that are competing for that spot don't even play sometimes. So you may think, well, what if we do a play-in? Obviously, 8th, I don't know if it's going to be the same, qualifications. You have to be within 4 games to be in the play-in. But obviously, I think that would obviously create a more popular, I think it's going to be a more popular idea. I definitely think they want to keep that, and I think that would be a good idea going forward. Now, this actually even adds more competitiveness in the bottom of these conferences because, let's say, they do keep it at 4 games. Now, usually think about it. You're going into the last game of the season. You're 4 games back. 8th seed spot. You already got your playoff. Well, now as a team, you may not even have to. You only have to be within 4 games of that 8th seed, and you'll still have a chance to get in. That may be an incentive for some teams that feel like, well, we're only almost out of that 4-game slot. Now, obviously, you have to overtake whoever's in the 9th spot at that spot. But it obviously is something that I think a lot of teams would like in terms of competitiveness. It keeps it competitive and makes teams fight longer for something. Another thing they possibly discuss as a potential casualty of the 2021 season in the coronavirus is the fact of the All-Star Game. Now, currently, the All-Star Game is scheduled to be in Indianapolis. But the NBA is discussing potentially canceling the All-Star Game because of the fact that with the season cut by 10 games, the All-Star break is usually a weekend, usually a good week and a half sometimes of games off for the players. Basically, that mid-half season break. Well, you're cutting the season down by 72, plus you're starting it in December. And you're still trying to get it done before the Tokyo Olympics. So potentially they might consider canceling the All-Star Game and All-Star Weekend this year. Which obviously, I'm sure as a player it was nice, obviously, having that time to really just kind of have fun. I'm sure it's always hard for the city hosting it, which this year's Indianapolis, because the All-Star Game brings in so much money for any respective city that does host the event. And so obviously losing it will obviously not be great for that. But obviously with COVID-19, how could you really do the All-Star Game when it's supposed to be a fanfare event, but you're not even sure if you're going to be able to have fans? So it's understandable why the NBA would go in that route if they did actually decide to actually finalize and make that decision at the end of the day. So we'll have to see about that. Now, obviously, the NBA is still looking into playing with fans next season, but they may not start the season with fans. It's always been more of a scenario where they would maybe have to play some of the season and then potentially fans could come later. But that just depends on the vaccine, everything that happens outside of the NBA, the comfortability, everything like that of that sort. Would certain teams potentially be like, okay, let us have up to a certain capacity. Let us do that. Let's see if we work with that and see what happens. Also, according to Windhorst and Lowe, the NBA Board of Directors is also expected to talk about the possibility of in-season tournaments, which is something the league has toyed with implementing in previous years. Obviously, in the talks coming up and with the new CBA, they were discussing potentially adding mid-season tournaments, things like that, potentially maybe for a draft pick, maybe for a lottery pick, maybe for something like that. That is something the league seems to really want to add into their season. Now, as they say, in terms of maybe playoff teams or championship contender teams, a mid-season play-in or a tournament like that may not mean as much to you. But maybe teams that are young, maybe teams that are rebuilding, maybe teams that are fighting to try to be relevant again, could use those as good, points to potentially do something, potentially in whatever is on the line and what they're offering. So that would be very interesting as well. So, obviously, I think one of the biggest also things here that we have to look at is the NBA definitely wants their playoffs to start around the same time the playoffs will start usually, and they want to make sure they keep that on track. So, obviously, the NBA has a lot of decisions that they're making and doing that. Now, also, one thing about the All-Star game I did not mention. Yes, they will cancel the All-Star game, but what would happen is there just wouldn't be any games. So, basically, you would have a 2-week break. So, basically, you would just have players, team, staff, just not doing anything for 2 weeks. I'm sure with COVID, protocol, they'll still allow people to train, whatever. You just wouldn't have that time for games. So, obviously, it'll be interesting because usually, like I said, the All-Star week is usually a week to a week and a half. The fact that they may give teams a full 2 weeks with no type of action, that would be very interesting to see how they implement that, because of the fact that it's not really something you really hear of a lot when you talk about that. And obviously, you've even had discussions in previous years with All-Star breaks. Is it too long of a break? Are players coming back too rusty from it, et cetera, et cetera? So that's part of it. Now, Michele Roberts of the NBA PA says there may need to be a bubble for the 2020-21 season. She said that there's a possibility that a bubble concept may still be the best way to go going into next season. This is what she said, and I quote, "If tomorrow looks like today, I don't know how we say we can do it differently," Robert told ESPN. "If tomorrow looks like today, and today we all acknowledge, and this is not Michele talking, this is the league, together with the PA and our respective experts saying this is the way to do it, then that's going to have to be the way to do it." Obviously, a lot of NBA fans, a lot of NBA players, I'm sure, would rather not play the season the way it was just played, especially if they're expecting to play at actual arenas. Now, obviously, it's going to be hard to also play a longer schedule and keep players in a bubble. So, again, it goes into the questions of would there be regional bubbles? Would there be, maybe a bubble for the Eastern Conference, a bubble for the Western Conference, things like that. That would be kind of the big question when it comes to something like that. And I'm sure, listen, they truly probably won't make a decision on if there's going to be a bubble until they know when the season will start. That's one reason why some people said the league was trying to maybe push the season back even further into January, because that may increase the chances for them to have fans and play at arenas, where obviously playing it a little sooner, like December 22nd, might make them have to go back into a bubble, because it's only 2 months after you just played your last game. So unless, I don't know if you're expecting something to change, we're entering winter by that time, and there's supposed to be a second wave. I don't see how you would sit here and say from 2 months ago, now we can play in arenas, in terms of what the experts are saying to the NBA. So obviously, those are all big questions that the NBA has to discuss. These are all big questions the NBA has to figure out. And it'll be interesting to see how they come to that decision. But obviously, this board of directors meeting on Friday will be important in terms of seeing what the next step to take is with this pandemic affecting the NBA the way it is. But that's all the time we have here for the first segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Coming up next, we're going to get into some news surrounding the Celtics. Also, Heat rumors also as well. And Danny Green made an interesting comment about LeBron James, saying if the season does start at the projected 22nd, LeBron may miss the first month of the season. Very interesting comment. Stay tuned. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. This is Brice Lewis here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. I only endorse one sports book, and that's BetUS.com. Why you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid.
live betting, MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. They have it all. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Go to betus.com now and fill out your information. It only takes a minute. When you get to how did you hear about us box, type in GSMC and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today, and don't forget to type in GSMC and get up to 150% bonus on your first deposit. That's BetUS.com, America's favorite sportsbook.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the NBA potentially eyeing a 72-game slate that would start on December 22nd or around Christmas. Obviously, that's going to be the big talking point in the Board of Governors meeting that they will have this Friday, discussing potentially the plans going into next season. Obviously, as now the NBA faces their next challenge and trying to decide, when do we start this next season? How do we go about this next season? Do we need a bubble or not? All of those will be on the table in the discussions, starting with the board of directors on Friday. Obviously, Michele Roberts from the NBPA has already said that right now it looks like a bubble is still likely needed at this moment, especially with them starting the season sooner, potentially on December 22nd, and starting it later until like January. So obviously all of that will be something that will be big to look into, something to keep an eye on, I would say, moving on forward into the weeks coming to the NBA. Now, continuing on the new start, Danny Green recently was in an interview talking about, the Lakers winning a championship and what his thoughts are on the next season. And so, obviously, currently, as we know, the news that the league could start in December, he was asked what players may think about that, and he went out and said that he thinks some guys won't be there, and he also said that he thinks LeBron would be one of them. He thinks LeBron James wouldn't be there. And I quote, this is what he said on the Ringers NBA show. If we start in December, I think most guys are like, I'm not going to be there. To have that quick of a restart, I wouldn't expect to see LeBron there. I wouldn't expect to see him there for the first month of the season. Obviously, again, with Shams Charania talking and saying that right now, December 22nd in 72 games is the starting point, that would be a very quick turnaround for the league if to do that. Because obviously that was one reason why a lot of people were kind of concerned with this schedule, with the season ending in October. Because to turn around and say December we're playing again, and then teams in the NBA Finals only getting 2 months, would that potentially give wear and tear on those finals guys? Would it make the Lakers more prone to injuries and the Heat more prone to injuries since they got the shortest layoff as any other team? And I think that would be again huge, especially for LeBron, who is still considered the face of the league, if that happened, to say, hey, I'm not going to play for the first however many games of the year, and I'll come back and play whenever. Because then you're thinking, well, you have training camps and all that stuff, so you're telling me LeBron's going to miss all of that and then just try to come back and play basketball? Like, I think some people would be intrigued by that. So I think that's something that is obviously going to be discussed within the ranks of the NBA. And I'm sure players have talked about this within circles. Danny Green's not saying this going out on a limb. I'm sure he has talked to other players about this particular situation. Hey, especially players on his own team, like, hey, would you play as soon as they would expect us to play after winning this championship? Because you could see, hey, LeBron doesn't play. Why should I come back and play? Why should I come back? And then also, could that affect the competitive balance? If let's say AD decides to say, I'm not playing. You're going to have your two best players not play the first month. Now, obviously, it's the first month of the season, so there's no need to overreact and think, oh, this is the end of the year for the Lakers. But you would obviously not want your team to start off maybe not with their full roster talent. The Lakers start off maybe 2-6, 2-8, maybe 3-9, and then LeBron and AD have to come back, have to get themselves in the playing shape while also trying to get this team back above 500 and back into a top seed in the Western Conference. So those are things that will be discussed among player circles, and I'm sure teams would ideally maybe not want that. But I've already said, like I said last segment, starting the season early has its, perks. Every team can make $500 million more. Money talks. The money is green and it talks. NBA teams want that money, especially because COVID and that loss of fan revenue hurts them. So being able to regain some of that money in terms of that money would be big if they were able to maybe potentially pull off something like that. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on moving on forward. But now we're going to get into some Celtic rumors. And the biggest thing with the Celtics rumors is surrounding Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward, during his tenure in Boston, has been surrounded by injuries. He's a 30-year-old small forward. He can still play, so this is not by any sort him or me or anybody saying Gordon Hayward cannot play. Gordon Hayward can still play the game at a high level till this day. He has shown that these last 2 years after coming back from that horrific leg injury. So now there's rumors. We have been talking about for the last few episodes Victor Oladipo. He is a guy who has been in trade talks. Not officially by Indiana, but there has been trade rumors, I'll say, that he may want out of Indiana. Maybe Indiana's willing to let him go. Maybe he's not as big a part of the plans like he used to be. Well, now they're saying that Indiana may have interest in bringing in Gordon Hayward. And so the big question with this trade is, what would Boston want in return for a Gordon Hayward? I think this would be a good position. Now, first, I want to make this clear. I don't think Victor Oladipo would be in this trade. He could be, but to me, I don't think he would be in this trade, to me. I think Boston has needs they need to fill. Because if the Pacers give up Victor, they may feel like, well, we don't need to give you anything else. Or we may give you a pick, but no other player, or a player that really is just going to maybe be at the end of your bench. You might buy out. You might, something like that. If I'm Boston, what is one of my biggest weaknesses from this past year's team? Bench depth and bench players and big men. There have been also rumors in Indiana, and I've heard and seen some of the Indiana fan base talk about potentially trading Miles Turner. I think maybe Hayward for Turner would be a good trade because Boston is now serving. Because remember, Boston still has Marcus Smart. They can just insert Marcus Smart into the starting lineup if they need to. They could go Kemba, Smart, Brown, and Tatum if they want to go small, and then have Miles Turner at the 5. Now you have a quality big man, and you still have probably one of the best starting lineups in the NBA. Because at the end of the day, if you trade it for Oladipo for Hayward, I don't see where you're really getting better to me. You still have a big liability in the front line, and you still have a big liability on your bench. So at least with this trade, you can get stronger at a place that you were weak because you still have top players on your team that can make up for that Gordon Hayward loss of scoring. And then they can go in the free agency in the draft and figure out how they want to do their bench. So if I was the Pacers in Boston, I would think that would be a trade I would want to look into potentially. Because I feel like Boston knows probably their best trade piece, if they were going to trade anybody on this team, would be Gordon Hayward. And Gordon Hayward can still play. He's only 30. So you can get a good piece back. So getting a good quality big man or even getting some quality 3-and-D guys would be something I would look into if I'm the Boston Celtics, because that's something that is one of your biggest needs coming into next season. And if you want to take that next step, you've gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals twice in the last 3 years. You were a game 5 away, and then you were a game 6 away, and then you were a game 7. Yeah, you're a game 7 away and a game 6 away if you're Boston from making it to the finals. So now, can you get those finishing touches? Can Danny Ainge figure out the finishing touches to get this team fully complete and get them to the next step and the next level of where they want to go? And I think that's going to be the big thing here. And then the Indiana side of things, you get yourself another scorer who can basically score. And then Gordon Hayward, he was not the first or the second option this year on the team. He was even the third option this year. He still played well, being the fourth option on Boston when healthy. What option would he be on Indiana? You'll probably go Michael Brogdon, Warren, if he really is what we saw in the bubble, Warren. And then, Brogdon, Warren. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody right now. I feel like I'm forgetting another option they have on the team that can score. Oh, Sabonis when he gets back. When he gets back, 3 guys. And then Gordon Hayward has played well as a fourth option. He can slide in there as a fourth option. You can still get scoring. And so really, you're getting a guy who and depending on how you view, who wants to maybe be there, could score. You could free up Sabonis more in the paint, let him be the main big guy, and then, formulate your team like that. Maybe get a couple of draft picks from Boston. Maybe get one of their players from Boston, add somebody to your bench. It's all about how can you improve your team in these deals, and I think Indiana could really improve making a deal like this. So I think both teams, there's benefits here. It's just a matter of compensation. What does each team want back in return for the other to feel like they've gotten what they truly want out of this particular trade? And the last story before we get out of there for this segment. The Warriors have expressed interest in bringing back former Raptors, former Knicks, former Hawks guard Jeremy Lin. If people probably forgot about Jeremy Lin. If you forgot, Jeremy Lin actually before this past season signed to play in China. So he agreed before the season started last year to leave the NBA. And now, basketball was canceled. Basketball has stopped. Well, now the Warriors have interest in bringing him back. And they also said Brooklyn, keep an eye out for Brooklyn. They also could bring him in. Jeremy Lin is a pretty good point guard to me, in my opinion. He's a guy who can make some plays, have some big games. He played well for the Hawks. He's played well. We all know about Lin's sanity with New York. He's a guy who, he may not be your star or your main 6 man, but Jeremy Lin is a veteran player who can still play. In Beijing, China last year, he averaged 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists a game. So I think that would be interesting to see that. I think with Golden State, maybe you say, hey, we would feel really good about Jeremy Lin backing up Steph Curry. We think he can hold it down if Steph got hurt. It's not, even though he's not the shooter Steph is, Jeremy Lin can still play this game. I have seen it with my own 2 eyes. So I definitely believe that would be a good fit for him, especially in that offense that the Golden State Warriors like to run, that very free-flowing motion offense. Just whoever gets the best shot, very, ball movement, eccentric, would be a good offense for Jeremy Lin. And like I said, we don't know exactly maybe how they're going to play Jeremy Lin or how much they would use him. I feel like if in Brooklyn's case, if Brooklyn decided to go after him, I think again, if you're bringing Jeremy Lin, if you keep Spencer Dinwiddie, he'll probably be riding the bench a lot. But if you got rid of Spencer Dinwiddie in a trade potentially, Jeremy Lin will maybe be the number 2 point guard behind Kyrie, and then maybe we'll see more of Linsanity in Brooklyn. So these are obviously destinations that would be intriguing for him to go. And I'd be excited to see Jeremy Lin back in the league once again. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're actually going to get into some NBA more free agent rumors, and also talk about the Miami Heat, as they're in a couple of news and rumors stories about certain players on their team maybe being on the trade block, or them potentially rejecting trades for players that they feel like are untouchable on their roster. So stay tuned for all that right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Danny Green's comments about LeBron James potentially missing the first month of the season if it does start back in December, as he thinks that him and other players may actually agree to say, you know what, it's too soon, it's too quick of a turnaround. I need at least one more month off before I return to play. We also discussed potential rumors about the Pacers being interested in Gordon Hayward, what I think, how that trade could be beneficial for both teams, with them both, maybe having some needs they want to have filled, potentially maybe having a better fit, and potentially doing things that might be best for them. And also Jeremy Lin potentially returning to the NBA, as the Warriors have expressed some definite interest in Jeremy Lin, and Brooklyn Nets are also a team in the background to look out for as well. But now, back to some NBA free agent rumors. Now, obviously, a week ago we discussed Blake Griffin, as people wonder about his future in Detroit. Is Detroit really going to move off of Blake Griffin? Now, one thing we have to point out with Blake Griffin is that he is considered to have one of the worst contracts in the NBA with his age and injuries, as he is owed $75.6 million over the next 2 seasons. And with his, like I said, very up and down health history, especially from this last year only playing in 10 games, it makes you wonder, is it worth potentially trading for Blake Griffin? So, is there really a trade market for Blake Griffin? Now, Zach Lowe says that he thinks that enough people have asked him about how Blake Griffin is and how he's doing, and he thinks Blake Griffin is going to have some type of a market, but it won't be a strong one. But he can definitely help a team win if that's what you need him for. And I definitely agree with that. Blake Griffin as a third option on some teams would be a good idea. I think the only thing about him, it's kind of the same thing with Chris Paul. Remember when Chris Paul was on the trade block from Houston? Everybody was like, wow, his contract is terrible. He's old. He's injured. Who would want to take that deal? That's kind of where Blake Griffin is right now, where he's in a position where a lot of people will sit here right now and think, the same things. He's old. He's injured. Obviously, he's younger than Chris Paul right now. So he's not 33, 34 on this deal. But with his injuries and him never really truly reaching the expectations that were set for him coming out of Oklahoma, would a team maybe take a flyer on Blake Griffin? And that's going to be an interesting, I think, story. Because one thing I would want to know is who's interested. Who exactly would be interested in Blake Griffin? I could see a team maybe not on the higher end of the winning spectrum, like a Knicks or a Cleveland Cavaliers potentially maybe making a move like that. I don't think a championship contender team would make a move on Blake because of the fact that, of the money first, because most championship teams don't really have the money to bring in a guy like Blake Griffin. But also Teams are also waiting for the Giannis sweepstakes. You might not want to spend that type of money on Blake, potentially ruining the chance to get Giannis. And so I could see there being actually a pretty good chance he could still stay in Detroit. But I don't think a championship contender would go out of their way to bring in a Blake Griffin either. Now, only one team that I could maybe see making a move like that might go back to the Boston Celtics. Again, if you have Gordon Hayward for Blake Griffin, both of them have pretty expensive contracts. Gordon Hayward is only a year younger. He ever since the big injury, he's played in most games since he's been back. He's been banged up here and there, but he's been more healthy. Detroit could use some perimeter scoring, and I think maybe that's a move they would potentially look into, doing a swap for Gordon Hayward and Blake Griffin. Again, he doesn't, for Boston's side of it, he doesn't feel their interior defensive, issues or anything, but he gives them a guy in the interior who can go get them a bucket, which they didn't have. And then maybe if you want to use Tice or somebody as your defensive guy, and then Blake Griffin's your offensive guy, maybe you could work with that. Maybe you could do something with that. But even with that, you still may want to still try to maybe add maybe a defensive guy in the post, potentially. Maybe, if they feel confident about, would you maybe play Taco Falls more next year? You don't know. So that's just an idea in terms of teams that could be potentially competing for a championship. But if not, I don't see a major team going out of their way to trade for Blake Griffin. Another rumor is Andre Drummond, actually. Andre Drummond, yes, some Cleveland Cavalier news. So, apparently, Andre Drummond is undecided on his $28.8 million player option. Now, if he hits the free agency market, he would, honestly, in this market, he would actually be pretty sought after. Again, every big man that you can think of, you have to throw Boston to the hat because they have to look at it. But one thing about it is that, remember when he was traded to Cleveland, everybody was reporting that he will probably stay in opt-in because of the money he was getting, because the perception is he wouldn't get that same money if he left and tried to get it at another team. Now, Andre Drummond is only 27 years of age. But I believe Andre Drummond will stay in Cleveland to take the money, because you have to understand what type of big man Drummond is in today's NBA. He is not a shooting big man. He is a back to the basket rebounding machine. We know Drummond can rebound with the best of them. And also, he's had some of his best offensive numbers as well this past couple of years. But he is not a guy who can stretch the floor. He pretty much preoccupies the paint. And with the NBA becoming more of a space game and big man's able to go off screen and shoot threes, he can be a liability for particular teams. And so, I think that if I'm Drummond, if you really care about money, it honestly, in this situation, it depends on how important money is to him. If money is one of the major things that he wants, he probably needs to opt in, because I don't see another team willing to maybe go up to $30 million and pay for him. He may have to take that $28 million option, stick it out with Cleveland for a year, and then after that, then re-enter the free agency market. We know, with the big class of Kawhi, Paul George, LeBron James, and then see what his market looks like. Then gives himself another chance to potentially maybe have another big year. Maybe make a team say, you know what, yeah, he may not be the typical big man that you want in today's NBA, but he's really good at what he does, and we may be willing to pay him. So I don't think he's going to legitimately stay with Cleveland because he wants to stay with Cleveland. But I think that he'll want to stay with Cleveland because he knows he won't get the money anywhere else. Because listen, I'm sure if his agent is a good agent, he needs to be, I always say a good agent to me is an honest agent. Because don't cost your client money by trying to tell him he can get more money everywhere else. Because I understand the thinking. Oh, open market, somebody's going to pay you. But what if that doesn't happen? What if he opts out and then nobody wants to pay him what he could have had? Now you didn't lost your client money, and that's how agents get fired, because they got their client to think, we can make more money this way, and then they don't make more money. They are actually losing money, and then you see player has let go of agent because they lost the money, because they're not able to get a job, because they won't come down after pay. So I'm sure if he's a good and honest agent, he'll tell Andre Drummond, hey, we need to opt in. We need to keep this deal, stick it out another year in Cleveland. Even if they trade you, that money is still going to be paid to you. And then we can go into the market the next year after another season, if you have another good year, and then see how much money you can make then. So I think Andre Drummond will be staying with Cleveland for that particular reason. And then another rumor is that the Denver Nuggets could be very much after Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday has been mentioned in trade talks for the Pelicans for, I feel like, the last 3 years now. 4 years. Because he's one of probably the better two-way guards in the league, and a very good player still at this point in his career. He can help any team win. And like I said, he does it on both ends. And obviously the Pelicans right now are in a process where you have a lot of young talent. Drew is a little bit older. And maybe they feel like we could bring in maybe more draft picks, another player, other types of players than Drew Holiday, because they do have a lot of guards. And they say that plenty of teams are willing to go after Holiday, but one team that sticks out is the Denver Nuggets, because they're looking to capitalize on their Western Conference Finals appearance. I think that would be a great move for Denver. Because I think one thing about Denver, yes, Torrey Craig is fine. Monte Morris is fine. But you need a proven second guard. And I think bringing in Drew Holiday would be great. To help with the maturation of Jamal Murray, Drew Holiday can have big nights sometimes. Drew Holiday can have a big night sometimes. I think if you have those four guards, Torrey Craig, Monte Morris, Drew Holiday, Jamal Murray, that's a pretty good four guards in terms of your starters and first two off the bench. If they're able to bring back a Jeremy Grant, you got Joker, you got Michael Porter. Michael Porter takes another step. Denver could now be a team that you have to say could make it back to Western Conference Finals. And then you just added one of the best two-way guards in the league. Because that's one thing you could say about Denver in their weakness of last year. Outside of Murray and Joker, you weren't really sure who was going to be their third scorer. Because like I said, Michael Porter was just playing his first year. You would think he would be the third scorer. But if you don't think he might take that next step, or you want to give him more time and maybe take some pressure off of him, bringing in a Drew Holiday would be great for that, because then Drew could be your third guy. Drew is a guy, if Jamal struggles or Joker struggles, he can go get you a bucket. He has done it multiple times before. And so I think that move would be great for the Nuggets in terms of them trying to stay competitive, because every team in the Western Conference, with Golden State looking like they're going to come back next year, and then, Clippers running it back, the Lakers running it back. Western Conference teams are not trying to stand pat. They're trying to make the necessary upgrades needed to stay in the race next year to come out of the Western Conference, because they still feel like even with the Lakers winning it all, it's not so far off where it was just like the Lakers are like Golden State with Kevin Durant and they're just so much better than everybody else. There's nothing you really can do unless you're able to get another Kevin Durant-like star on your team. They beat everybody in 5 games of the Western Conference, and they won the championship, but we feel like if we added this player, a couple of those games might have went our way, and then we could have been representing the Western Conference in the NBA Finals. So with that thought process in mind, this is why a lot of teams may sit here and really try to make a move, and for Denver, this would be a really good move for them. I'm sure maybe, with a move like this, though, I'm sure you would have to probably give up a Torrey Craig or a Monte Morris, which is fine. You give one of them up potentially, maybe a PJ Dozier, maybe a pick, and then you make that move, because obviously you may want to take some money off the books to help maybe get back Jeremy Grant, and then, the Pelicans get them a guy who can still play, and it fits in maybe with Drew Holiday's getting Drew Holiday's money off the books. Maybe they could be a little bit more active in free agency, bring in some guys they want to help this team become a win-now team with Zion and Lonzo and Brandon Ingram, and then bam, there you go. Pelicans could be a more improved team because of that deal as well, just depending on what they get back in return from the Nuggets as compensation. So all of that will be very interesting to look at,
to see if Denver really is able to maybe pull off a trade for Drew Holiday this offseason. But that's all the time we have here for the segment. Coming up next, we're going to get some more NBA news and rumors. We have a lot to talk about. Obviously, we're going to get into the Heat news to start off next segment, so stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed NBA free agent rumors from Andre Drummond potentially not opting out of his option that people expected him to opt into. Also, discussing the Nuggets potentially going after guard from the New Orleans Pelicans, Drew Holiday potentially to help add to the team to potentially make it back to the Western Conference Finals and even further. We obviously talked about that and other news and rumors last segment. Now we're going to get some more trade rumors and news in the NBA, starting with some Heat news. I've been talking about that for a couple of segments. Going to get some Heat news here. So there's been a lot of conflicting reports about Miami Heat's interest in Victor Oladipo. Some outlets say they are interested. Some outlets say they have no interest. Well, one rumor says that if they are interested in Victor Oladipo, there's one player you can take off the table if Indiana did mention their name. And they actually said Pat Riley would probably hang up. And that's rookie sensation Tyler Hero. And I think that would be pretty smart. Victor Oladipo is not the type of player you give up a young, promising, potential star in Tyler Hero for. And so I completely understand if Pat Riley got a call from Indiana. They said, well, let's see here. How about, let's, give me Udonis Haslem. I don't know, maybe a Duncan Robinson. What about Tyler Hero? Pat Riley hang up the phone right there. It's over. All right, next caller. Because I think Tyler Hero is one of the few players on the Heat roster that is probably untouchable unless they're getting a star back in return. Like if this was for Giannis, he'd probably do it. If this is for Victor Oladipo, he would not make that move. He would not mortgage potentially a young star player for Victor Oladipo. Not even knowing what type of Victor Oladipo you're going to be getting as well. So definitely understand that if they wouldn't want to go in that direction. Also, another player that they've said they wouldn't move, Bam Adebayo. They said Heat would reject offers for Bam Adebayo with F-bombs ringing. So that's very emphatic that they have no interest in moving him because they also know how big of a key he is to their team. Now, you would maybe think within yourself, so you're not moving Tyler Hero, you're not moving Bam, so who would you move? Now, like I said, Tyler Hero would probably be moved for a real star. But Bam, I could see them saying, even in a deal with a real star, he would be the one piece they wouldn't move. Because listen, you can't get big men like Bam Adebayo, as talented as Bam Adebayo, every day. With guys like him, he's more of a guy that you probably need to hang on to. Because Tyler Hero, not to diminish anything he's done. He's a guy who can make big shots, shoot the three, but you can probably find a guy like a Tyler Hero somewhere, or at least a resemblance of him in another player, where Bam Adebayo, you don't find Bam Adebayos everywhere every day. And so I completely understand them not even entertaining potentially, putting Adebayo in any trade talks. So
Tyler Hero, to me, would more than likely be the top trade piece for Miami if they did make a trade, but it depends on who is involved in that trade. Now, another guy they've also been talking about, two other guys actually on their team that they may be willing to move for a superstar. Duncan Robinson, obviously one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Some people may consider the best three-point shooter in the league. He's another piece that a team definitely might want to look at. And guard Kendrick Nunn. Now, I'm going to throw a team into this hat. I've mentioned them before with Houston. But another team that might be interested in a deal like this, I would think would be the 76ers. I think the 76ers would have to look at a deal like this and think, well, if we could get Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and Kendrick Nunn for Joel Embiid, would you make that deal? Would you make the deal? Would I make the deal? Because again, it depends. If you're trying to build around Ben Simmons, you just added one of the best three-point shooters in the game. You added Tyler Hero, who also can knock down the three and also can play make. Tyler Hero just isn't strictly 3D. He can play make and give them some scoring. And Kendrick Nunn, if he can look more like he did when he was an undrafted at the beginning before the restart, you have three guys who can score the basketball. You have shooting, and then that all just helps Ben Simmons' game if he penetrates, because you got to watch Duncan. You got to watch Tyler. That's a move that I think I'd pull the trigger on that if I was 76ers, because you're getting players who would fit with Ben if you did want to build around Ben. Now, of course, from a talent perspective, you may sit here and say, that's not worth it. But think about it. They always say, when you always trade superstars, do you really ever get the equal compensation for him? Like, realistically? Like, if you trade LeBron James, unless you're trading, like, KD for LeBron, that would be considered, in a lot of people's eyes, equal compensation. But guys like Embiid and them, can you unless you're getting another star like him back in return, would you really be able to get that equal compensation? That's why when you make a move like that, you're making a move like that because you're thinking about how you want the team to be filled out, how you want the team to be built. And I think that move would help the 76ers roster. And then you get the Heat. Now they have a dominant big man in Joel Embiid. You got Jimmy Butler. You still got Goran Dragic. You know, Iguodala plays another year. You got Iguodala. Kelly Olynyk. You still got some guys. Now, obviously, you have to figure out how to replace the three-point shooting of a Duncan Robinson and the playmaking of a Tyler Hero. Obviously, that's the only thing about these trades, that you did give up some young pieces, so you got to figure out how can we fill that hole. And you're obviously thinking that Joel Embiid, with his talent, could help fill that, just with his talent level in general. And then if you play a team like the Lakers, now it's not a mismatch. Now you got Bam and Embiid. Now the only thing about that would be, would that crumble up the paint with the Miami Heat? Because the Heat would have to switch from being a three-point shooting team to a now we play in and out. We play through our big men. Now Bam can hit the mid-range, and Embiid can hit the mid-range and the three. These big men can stretch the floor a bit, but you probably want a guy like Embiid to play inside of the paint. And you probably want a guy like Bam Adebayo to play closer to the paint as possible, even though he's more of an athletic guy. So that would only be the question, is that clash of styles potentially. But I think that would be a move that I would consider if I was the 76ers. But the Heat obviously are trying to make sure they're making deals that fit for them and work for their team in the best way possible, since they're trying to figure out how they should become, or how they should be, one of the best teams in the league. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. Now, one interesting story I want to get to from Yahoo Sports. There has been an article saying that NBA free agents are secretly already agreeing to deals. Now, Dan Feldman from Yahoo Sports posted an article, and this actually came from a quote that was said by ESPN's Brian Windhorst. And Brian Windhorst said
I have already heard of a deal that's been agreed to. Who knows whether it's true or not? And then Bobby Marks of ESPN also said, I had one agent because I was talking about his free agent and salary projections, right? He said, hey, you're really low. I've already got 2 offers from 2 different teams. So, obviously, that's interesting because would that be considered tampering? What is that? Because obviously, the offseason is still a little bit in flux. It's a little bit in flux. People are still trying to figure out, okay, what kind of offseason are we doing? Now, Keith Smith from Yahoo Sports made a tweet about this, and he said this, and I quote, multiple teams are asking the NBA for clarity on offseason dates because of how tight windows are. Teams would like some direction on dates beyond just November 18th NBA draft. There are rumors circulating that some free agents have already reached agreements for next season. And that would be interesting just because you have players telling their agents, hey, give me some offers, give me some deals. And with, like I said, the offseason so kind of all over the place, I can understand why players may try to take advantage of that and say, hey, I want to know what my market looks like. Like, what are people willing to give me? And then agents are reaching out to teams. Well, how much would you give my client? Teams are like, we'll give him this. And then you may have a player saying, I'll take it. And literally, you have players who just agree to a contract with a team before we even got to the new league year. So it's interesting to hear a report like this because it's almost like the agents and the players are going to say, with all of this unclear, of what the offseason is, we can take advantage. We can take advantage of the fact that the offseason is unclear. We can start talking to some players and then maybe, telling an agent, hey, we might give you this for him if he's interested in it. So that's interesting. And then one last story before we get out of here for the show. Spencer Dinwiddie is thinking about and reportedly leaving Rock Nation and potentially representing himself. Now, this isn't actually surprising to me because remember last year when Spencer Dinwiddie was a free agent, or talking about being a free agent, he had this deal he made with fans where he said, if y'all can make me $23 million in Bitcoins, I'll let y'all choose where I sign. Now it was not really a success. Not a lot of people donated at all to it. But it's interesting that he would do something like that. And then, now hearing him saying, oh, I don't want representation, I'm going to represent myself, it's a little different. You don't really hear players doing that because the agent deals with a lot of the deals, the marketing, the advertisements. They're seeking you opportunities and everything like that. The agent does a lot of work for these players to help them be in the positions they do, get marketed the way they are, and get the money they get. So it's interesting to me, him potentially saying, I'm not going to have any representation. It would be interesting to see that because it would be interesting to see what would that turn into. So, Spencer Dinwiddie would be he'd be taking a little bit of a chance. But, hey, maybe he wants to represent himself. So that means any team that talks to him have to talk to him directly about what he wants. Teams that maybe want to trade for him, they got to talk to Spencer directly. They don't go through his agent. They got to go to him. Maybe he wants that clear communication between him and the team. So that would be interesting because I believe he would be one of probably the bigger names that would not have any representation. Because usually every team and every player has representation. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, let me be part of your day. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing GSMC podcasts here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, again, at GSMC_basketball. Also, don't forget to subscribe or leave a review wherever you're listening to us on. Definitely appreciate it. Definitely do.
This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.